What time is it?
It's kind of like watching TV, but, in your car.
Oh, God. 104.7 The K. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens in the studio.
I am not a stripper.
I beg to differ. If you've seen Machine Gun Symphony in the last few years, I bet you probably disagree with him on that statement. Either way, I'm Mike the Intern. That's Jay Stevens, and this is Dark Side of the Stream, episode 200.
Oh, ding, 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 ding. We don't have a cake or anything or confetti. Can we digitally put some confetti on this?
Really eat sugar that
Gosh,
often, so we're no fun. I guess we'll take some celery sticks and some carrot sticks.
Oh, yes.
We'll just sit
That's
and
nice.
crunch as we talk about
I'll have a
our
protein
200th
shake.
documentary that we watched on this podcast.
God, this is great.
This week was my pick. It's a documentary series that you can watch on Netflix. It's called Wyatt, Earp and the Cowboy War. Man, what an incredible story. Also, big props to Ed Harris, who narrates the thing. I love that guy. He's such a badass dude. And
I usually don't go for these ones that are like docudrama
reenactments.
reenactments.
Like this one though.
But this one was dope.
Yeah, badass.
Yeah, this was
from
dope.
the moment go till the way this whole
dope.
thing ended.
It was dope.
So let's start about the story, right? They start following a guy by the name of Wyatt Earp and his two brothers who had had some ins and outs with the law, sometimes on one side, sometimes on the other side. But Wyatt's starting to get a name for himself after he spent some time in Kansas. And one of the things I thought was very interesting that I did not know about his time in Dodge City was that the reason why he survived so long wasn't because he wasn't so quick to draw. A lot of times at this time period, people would just be like,
yeah.
And then eventually, that's a law of averages just says eventually you're going to get killed.
No, he
punched people right in the face. And everyone was like, what?
Oh.
And then they'd get knocked out,
Yeah.
he'd cuff them, and he'd take them away, which I thought was ingenious because everyone else was so quick to pull a gun. He's like, no, I'll just beat your ass with my fist. And that's what he did.
He did.
Multiple times. And most of the time, he just,
walked away.
Now,
well, and you got two brothers too, so you got like a little trio of dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the brothers that he had would definitely factor into the story on down the line. Another thing I thought was very interesting, and I had not heard about how Doc Holliday and he met.
Great story too.
Which
yeah.
is
Doc saved his life.
Doc's story in itself is insane because Doc is a doctor / dentist, right? Very successful. In your mind, all you think of is Val Kilmer and his portrayal of a very sickly alcoholic, just kind of wild card.
But that was at the end. Yeah.
That wasn't who he was. So he's a dentist. And of course he gets what they called at the time consumption, but it was TB, which there's so many things that I was like, oh my God, that's why they say that. Because I'd heard the term consumption. I never really knew that's what TB meant, but he gets consumption, the doctor. And at the time it was like, get dry air and here's your medicine. And it's a bottle of whiskey.
Yeah.
So that's literally what he was doing. He was taking his medicine.
Keep drinking. And he moved.
Yeah, and he moved to Arizona and started gambling. So you have this wildly intelligent who, if he had never got this, you would have never heard about him.
Right.
You never heard about who he was.
Yeah.
He'd have just been a really good
dentist
living on the East Coast, and that would have been his story.
Instead, he became a famous gunslinger.
Yeah, instead, he's hanging out at a bar one day, and he's gambling like he was known to do, and he looks outside and he sees a guy who's starting to get kind of cornered by a bunch of dudes. That guy outside was Wyatt Earp. He goes outside and he's like, hey, bros, what's the problem? At the same time, there's a guy about to put a gun in the back of Wyatt's back, and Doc takes him out, initially saving his life. And then from that on, Wyatt and him would be friends until Doc passed away in Colorado, which actually, even when they left the area to kind of get out. So there was a lot of gray area about who was in the right and who was in the wrong here as far as the law goes.
Well, and also these stories are handed down and told. It's like, are these really accurate stories?
Because there's so very tough to tell. There are so many people that had so much.
Everybody had their own stories.
And again, that's some other stuff that came into this. So we'll talk more about this as we continue. Wyatt Earp and the Cowboy War, Dark Side of the Stream, next on 104.7. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio discussing Wyatt Earp and the Cowboy War. So, of course, this definitely deals with the whole Tombstone, Arizona situation and the OK Corral.
Shootout at the OK Corral.
And it involves not only the Earp brothers and what they were doing in Doc Holliday, but also a group known as the Cowboys. Now, when you think about Cowboys today, you think about a guy who, he's roping up cows, making sure the cattle's getting across the country or whatever. but not in this situation. The cowboy actually was a derogatory term, essentially for a mob that was just
Outlaws.
They were
Yeah.
outlaws, but they were controlled and organized. And it was also, this was also post-Civil War, so that kind of came into a play too. That rebel essence with a lot of these guys who were trying to basically stop, not only get themselves rich, but also kind of screw with the government because they had just obviously lost a war in the Civil War. So there were a lot of people that had different interests in this, but they basically focus on the leader of the Cowboys. And
Ike Clinton.
Ike
Clinton.
I did not. Okay, now, and you brought up a really good point, and that is that we are hearing the story from the perspective of the winners, right?
Yeah, like
and again,
so and so shot first, pulled the gun right.
When
you
it
know,
comes to
maybe
people fighting
I don't
over
know
like this and dying, and I mean, there is no winner.
Right, stories get handed down and passed down.
Wyatt lost his brother, right? His other brother got maimed. They didn't win. He eventually goes from a mental space of the last thing that I need to do is pull a gun on someone to basically being like, I'm going to kill every single person involved in the killing of my brother. So
the vendetta. So
he goes from literally a guy who's like, look, there are a lot better ways to handle this too. I don't care. This is how you want to play. You all die now.
Yeah.
The thing that I thought, and I don't, again, this is from the perspective after, and we're what, 200 plus, like, not 200, 150 plus years away from this. Ike Clanton was a dirtbag. This guy was the worst. And how in the hell this guy could keep getting away with
and
all
keep
the stuff
lying
that he did,
and people
and
believing
everyone
him,
not calling him out? I just don't get it.
Yeah, well, that still happens nowadays,
It
so
does.
It still happens, man. We're seeing it. We're seeing it in real time right now.
We see it all the time. But again, like they just every time they had something to say about this dude, I was like, man, I hate this guy.
He'd weasel out of it, man.
They did a really good job in the Tombstone film of picking a guy who was a dirtbag that was like, in every time, like his in the shootout, Ike causes this whole thing. And what does he do when it starts to go down?
Runs,
don't shoot! And he runs right at Wyatt, who then throws him in and watches his friends get killed. Dude, it's just the guys that always instigated are always the first ones to run or duck. It's never the guy that's just sitting there saying, hey, wait a minute.
A lot of time, the guy that starts a fight is the guy that doesn't know how to fight.
No,
a lot. If you know how to fight, you're probably not starting a fight.
Because you know what it's like. And again, if you and I both agree with this, because we've all been in fights, when you have that mentality and you know how to fight, no one wins in a fight.
Yeah, you're not.
Even if you feel like you beat the guy down, if there's a part of you that's a human, you're going to feel bad about hurting another human being, whether they deserved it or not. So no one wins in a fight ever, and no one won in this one. But it did start a lot of crap, and we'll talk about what that entailed next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The K. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio discussing Wyatt Earp and the Cowboy War. So we glossed over a lot of stuff, and I mean,
there's a lot in there. It's a good watch.
Much in this. But basically, Ike gets his boys all riled up. They're like, "Hey, we're gonna kill these Earps. They're screwing with us. They're screwing with you. Let's get them." At the same time, a bystander hears them getting all crazy over at the OK Corral, runs over and tells the Earp brothers, hey, you might want to go over there. They've got guns. They're supposed to leave town, but they're not. They're saying they're going to kill you. So the Earps go down there with Doc Holliday to say, hey, man, we're going to get you out of town, leave. Something goes down. Basically, a lot of guys get shot. Ike flees because he's garbage. And then you would think, based on the eyewitness testimony, that after they had told Ike and his boys to leave town, they didn't do that. Earp and his brothers were there to enforce that ruling. Things went down. People got shot. You would think it was an open and shut case.
Oh, man.
Not so fast, because Wyatt Earp was actually banging the girl the sheriff was seeing at the time. Again. Don't get involved with mistresses.
Yeah, don't get involved with somebody else's woman. This leads to problems too.
But he was cheating on her since day one. She was like, I want to get out of this as fast as possible. So she met Wyatt and they struck up a relationship. But that pissed off Johnny Behan, who was the sheriff, and then comes out and says, no. Wyatt and his brothers are the ones that are guilty. So they get arrested with Doc Holliday and have to go to trial.
And trial's not looking good.
And the trial is insane too.
Trial's not looking good. Yeah.
It's just like we said with the mob. There's people that won't show up because they're afraid they're
witnesses that are flipping their stories because they get threatened.
They end up tracking down the guy who said, I saw them talking about the fact that they were going to go kill the Earp brothers, and I'm the one who went and told them about it. If it hadn't been for that dude.
No, the guy that it came down to was the the assistant DA or whatever, because he was like, that guy was there. He knows the story. And they're like, what? The sheriff's been lying too? And
Well,
like,
that
yep.
came down, but
Man.
but again, at that point, it became a line. It was these guys are against these guys, and you had back and forth. It almost became its own
Civil War.
Civil
Yeah,
War.
yeah.
The other part about this, and that was a big play about who was behind and the reasons why they did what they did. The banking situation and the whole railroad which was a whole part of this story that I had no idea.
Yeah, they were bankrolling Wyatt Earp and his boys to protect them.
The Pinkertons' involvement with it.
Charles, what's the banker? Morgan, right? What's the banker? The bank. Chase, JP Morgan. They were paying Wyatt Earp. They were paying. I know. The Morgan dude, right? The Morgan guy. He was paying Wyatt Earp to protect their silver transfer lines to protect them from the Cowboys.
God, what's the name? And I can't even think of the other bank that they would kept robbing on the stagecoaches.
Wells Fargo.
Yes, Wells Fargo.
Look at me knowing stuff.
Man, this guy, he's redeeming himself for Tom Finn all day. Wells Fargo. That it was also interesting. And it's crazy too, though, because, and this is something that everyone should be eye-opening. The media has been playing us since the 1800s,
they were doing
people.
Buying elections back then. That one president said he bought the election in that food documentary we watched,
1800s.
Yeah, media.
And if you don't think the media is playing you now, you are a fool.
They're still playing you.
Look what they were able to do with papers and telegraph.
Yep.
What can they do now?
Yeah, with AI. Yeah, exactly.
So crazy. We'll get back with our reviews when we discuss Wyatt Earp and the Cowboy War next on 104.7 The Cave. Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio one more time. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 200, Wyatt Earp and the Cowboy War. Again, this week we discussed this documentary. I thought it was incredible. I'd give it straight up 4.5 revolvers all day.
Here's the crazy thing. I was going to go solid 4 revolvers. The last 3 minutes of the show, my mind was blown the biggest, and I gave it another half. Because
so you were tied on this one. Oh.
Because you think gunslingers, gunfighters, Old West, everybody's going to end up being killed. That's just the game you play. No. Dude, Wyatt Earp ends up moving to Hollywood, being a consultant on Cowboy Western, living into his 80s, living a nice life. He got out of the game.
With the woman that he met.
If you're involved in, gangs, mafia, all that, getting out unscarred like that is a massive challenge. This dude did it. I had no clue. He moved to Hollywood and chilled and lived a nice life.
And again, him and his wife, who he met while he was in Tombstone, Josephine, wrote a book called I Married Wyatt Earp. Now, there was a lot of controversy about whether or not any of that stuff is true.
Well, that's the thing. It's all handed down stories.
But again, there are certain things about the fact that she hooked up with him and stayed with him until he passed away at the ripe old age of 80. But the fact that
the dude moved to Hollywood and was consulting on movies, man. Dude.
I mean,
what
a life. A boy that was born probably not too big of a town in Illinois who ended up being a film consultant in LA throughout.
Got out of the game, man.
And at one point, opened a brothel. And it was a pimp. I mean, you're crazy.
I love it. I love his style.
I know you do. Maybe we should get you.
Speaking of, I love his style. I've got a hidden gem documentary I found.
Okay, what are we watching?
And it's the best on YouTube. And with cheese season here upon us, it's perfect, only fitting. It's a documentary about the KC werewolf, the guy that would show up at all the games, every Chiefs game, no matter where the game was, home or away, in a werewolf costume. He was loved by the community, and it turns out he was also living a double life.
As a lot of them do, and we'll talk about that next.
It's free on YouTube.
Free on YouTube.
KC Werewolf or something like that. It's called. Yeah, it's an ESPN documentary. It's short.
We're talking about the guy who went on the run, right?
Yes. Yes.
Great story. We'll talk about him, and I'm sure if you tailgated Arrowhead, you probably ran into him at one point.
Probably have a picture with him. Yeah, you probably have a picture with the dude.
I definitely saw him in a few times. All right, we'll talk about that next on Dark Side of the Stream. As always, watch this live 9 a.m. on Facebook or YouTube, during my show at the same time, during Jay's show at 6 p.m. or always as a podcast for free in our 104.7 The Cave app. I am Mike the Intern. That's Jay Stevens reminding you we watch movies
documentaries
so you don't have to.
to.
Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave.